Hi, everyone. I'm Paris. I work at Google. I am a Kubernetes community manager here. Today, you are watching our awesome February edition of Meet Our Contributors. We have a couple contributors on the line today who are going to help us through various types of questions that you have. Those questions are coming into us from Slack, particularly the Meet Our Contributors channel. Also Twitter DMs if you'd like to be anonymous. Also Slack DMs if you'd like to be anonymous. A lot of folks prefer the anonymity, if I said that word right. And that's totally okay. We do have a code of conduct. We appreciate everybody being excellent to each other. The mentors, please feel free to ask each other questions as well, because your growth is just as important as everyone else's growth within the project. We already have a couple questions queued up, so we have an awesome schedule ahead for you today. And let's do some quick intros. George is behind the screen right there. George is another community manager that works at VMware, and he's helping us stream today and do some awesome things behind the scenes. Thanks, George. And then we also have Gus and Dims. Gus, why don't you go ahead and introduce us and tell us who you are, why you're here, and why Kubernetes?
Sure. I work for Bitnami as a developer on the Kubernetes team. I really like Kubernetes. I worked for Google for a long time, so was used to this style of technology, and then took a brief tour through OpenStack and accidentally ended up writing the OpenStack cloud provider for Kubernetes, and that's how I ended up in Kubernetes.
Awesome. And what SIGs do you participate in, Gus?
The SIG OpenStack one, historically, not so much now. The SIG CLI a little bit, and I kind of lurk on some of the networking stuff.
Very cool. And just for those listening who are not aware of our jargon, sometimes it's thick, so I apologize. But SIG means special interest group. That's how we divide the project. It's code base, it's documents, it's artifacts, and get things accomplished and moving forward in those certain areas. Gus mentioned networking. That's just one. P.S. They're looking for new contributors. And then Dims, why don't you introduce yourself next? Oh, you're on the mute. Yeah. We've been having a case of the mute button today.
I work for Huawei. I work on a few SIGs, SIG release, SIG testing, and basically some of the cross-cutting teams that I tend to help out with. Just like Gus, I was previously working on OpenStack as well. And I'm taking care of the code that Gus wrote now as well. So it's good to buddy up with you, Gus.
And then Dims, how did you start with Kubernetes? What was your entrance?
The first thing that I worked on was something called Magnum. It's a deployer for Kubernetes on top of OpenStack. So OpenStack. Magnum is very opinionated about how things like Kubernetes would run on OpenStack itself. So that was the first introduction to Kubernetes. And then I started diving deeper into better integrations and then found Gus's work and then followed him along and then started doing a few other things in Kubernetes. That's how it got started.
Gus, how did you end up with Kubernetes again? I'm sorry if you already addressed it. Like, what was your entrance? Like, do you remember what your first PR was?
Yes. Well, so I was trying to learn OpenStack. I just started working on OpenStack, and I wanted to learn all about it. So I was trying to put it all together from first principles, kind of do it the hard way, kind of thing, so I could learn all the pieces. And I was working for Rackspace at the time. So the resources they gave me were the Rackspace public cloud, which it's kind of an OpenStack cloud. So I was trying to install OpenStack. From a distance, the OpenStack pieces just look like web servers and databases. It's just Python web servers and MySQL databases. And so I was trying to install these, whatever it is, 15 or so different components onto some machines, and I said, well, I know how to do this. I want something that's a little bit like, Borg that I was used to from Google, and Kubernetes had only just sort of come out. So I was like, I'll try out this new Kubernetes thing to do that. And so I was trying to do OpenStack on Kubernetes on OpenStack way before any of the pieces were ready for that sort of thing. So it didn't work, but I learned an awful lot about all the different projects along the way. And because I was trying to run Kubernetes on the Rackspace cloud, I ended up writing the cloud provider for Kubernetes, which is the chunk of code in Kubernetes that knows how to talk to OpenStack. So I wrote that just along the way, just to get my little experiment working, and then forgot about it. And then about a year after that, people kept sending me some email pointing out bugs in the code I'd written. And I was like, whoa, people are using this? That was just my quick experiment that I wrote. So I kind of accidentally got into Kubernetes development. But that was my big PR, was that big patch, was that contribution. And that went into Kubernetes 0.5 or something back in 2014.
Dang.
So it was quite early. It was
you went back into the vault there, Gus.
Yeah.
Dims, when was your first PR? When was your first PR?
Oh, 2.5 years ago, I think, at least. Yeah.
Do both of you feel like your entrances into Kubernetes were traditional, meaning what other people follow?
I've hopped various open source organizations, to be honest. I was working at Apache Software Foundation before I got into OpenStack, and then from OpenStack I hopped into CNCF. So yeah, I've been doing open source for a while, but I don't think it's traditional in the sense that I think the more people that I see nowadays are people who are trying Kubernetes and they face a problem, so they come and ask and see the code, and and then gradually become contributors. But there is usually a strong link between their work that they do and their usage of Kubernetes that drives them to come here.
Yeah. When I started, it was so early in the project that a lot of the processes we have now didn't exist, and the organizational structure didn't exist. There were no SIGs. There was like 8 reviewers on the whole project, and you knew them all, kind of thing. There was not even really assigning reviews to people automatically, because there were so few reviewers that everyone reviewed them. So it was a very different project back then, and much simpler code base.
I was going to say, now we have all the automation.
Yeah, actually kind of still the same code base. It's just kind of grown sideways. Like, we didn't have stateful sets and deployments and things before. But the basic structure is still the same. The idea of etcd and putting things into there, and then like the control loops, that the structure's all the same. It's just grown.
There was no Prow, there was no bots, there was Jenkins. So yeah.
So a question that I get a lot from current contributors, nonetheless, is what's your best advice for them as they climb the contribution ladder? And for those that don't know what the contribution ladder is, with Kubernetes, it's a membership process that we have depending on how much contribution you've done to the project thus far, and your leadership and things that you've brought with it. Those are members, reviewers, approvers, sub-project owners. We work in owners files within GitHub. So what, for each of you, like, even if it's just a tip of the day, what's a tip that you would give a current contributor today that asks you for just information and maybe some advice on how to continue up the ladder?
You want to go first, Gus?
Yeah, I've usually just fallen into free software projects just by using them. Like, I use them, and usually I use them in a slightly unusual way, like trying to install OpenStack myself from scratch, kind of thing, or Kubernetes I've got here running on a little Raspberry Pi cluster. Just slightly unusual situation, and then you discover bugs, things that don't work quite well, or things that could work better, and then you just fix them. So little tiny things that have impact you personally, and so you can see when they're fixed, and you want to fix them. And just little stuff like, oh, I wish this error message was better. I hit this condition and it was really confusing, and it took me half a day to work out what that meant. If only the error message was phrased slightly better, that would have saved me half a day. So there's a really simple patch. and you can send that off and reviewed and merged, and just do that, and just keep doing that, and then eventually you'll get more familiar with the code base and take on bolder, larger changes. But it's just see a problem, fix a problem, and just keep going.
That was I liked the unusual situations response. I actually just wrote that down. So thanks. What about you, Dims?
I tend to kind of like look for areas where I have some prior knowledge. I used to take care of Nova Docker, so I still get into Signode related stuff, whether it is issues or PRs or hanging out on their weekly meetings. So find out some areas that you're interested in, whether it is storage or whether it is compute related stuff or whether it is networking. Then when you look at issues and PRs being filed and the work that is usually going on, just you will get a sense of who's doing what, and you kind of try to follow along what they're doing and see if you can help them in stuff that is happening, even if it's a quick review of a PR that somebody is doing. Try out a test case in a PR that somebody else is working on. That way you learn basically what are the problems, and then there's a lot of history that you can gather. We have a huge number of issues and PRs, so you can always go back and see, oh, somebody tried to do something similar to what you're trying to do, but then there was some feedback and they lost interest, or there was another way to do it, so they ended up doing some other way. So there is a lot of history that you can read up on and discover for yourself. So that is something that I would definitely recommend people to do. It takes some time, but then when you put in some amount of time, then things become easier. There is a learning curve involved, and the only way to deal with the situation is like drink from the hose kind of thing, right? So and keep asking questions. There is no wrong question. Hit people up on Slack. Turn the discussion into a mailing list thread, and keep asking stuff, because not everything is written down. We are trying to do a good job with writing stuff down, but it takes a there are still things in people's heads, and context is everything, and history, historical decisions. You can talk to people and they'll tell you why things are being done, and so be open. I know it's hard for some of us who are introverts, but it works in the longer run.
We had a question. I think Gus made a comment that says, "Do the work." How does a current contributor find out what work needs to be done, especially in times where repos don't necessarily use help wanted or good first issue labels? What are some tips there, because they think that it seems pretty ambiguous and they want to know exactly how they can make immediate impact?
Yeah, each SIG has a meeting which is recorded. So for me, I'm in Australia, so I'm not in a good time zone to attend a lot of these meetings. They're usually 3 a.m. or something for me. So I watch a lot of videos for them, and that gives you a good feel for what the focus of attention of that group is at the moment, and what they're working on and what they're trying to get done for the next upcoming release. So that's good to let you know about the big tasks, the big themes. So if you can get involved in them, then that's obviously going to be good, because that's the wave that's going through that SIG at the moment. On the other hand, for me, being in a wrong time zone, I actually kind of avoid those big tasks, because often they're already handled by people in the US or Europe, and it's kind of hard for me to work side by side with them without having a huge overlapping day. I can kind of do that with US from here.
What are some of your other tips for that too? That's a good question after that, but keep going. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I do want to say, like, that's good for just like remote team tips. So.
So I tend to pick my own tasks, things that I can work on myself. So it tends to be smaller. tends to be, like I said, just little issues that I've faced personally. And then, yeah, do them, fix them. So just little things, little grunge work. Like I said, error messages are always appreciated. Better error handling. There's always something somewhere or some new feature that doesn't exist that no one else is working on yet. Just pick it, start working with it, basically. Yeah, there is a lot of. One of the things I like about the Kubernetes community is they're all very friendly. I really enjoy working with the people and the attitude. Everyone wants to help. Everyone's very happy to help pull you through this process. So, you know, you're going to have to do some work yourself. You're going to have to read some code. You're going to have to understand how things go together. But if you ask questions, people will answer them and answer them very well, very
And then, Tim, what about you with as far as like do the work? Because I think we all say this.
Yeah, and so there are several ways to do it. One example I can walk you through is like towards the beginning of a release, if you go to SIG storage, for example, you will see that they have a spreadsheet. They track things that can be done and what can we do this, for this release, what can we do for the next release. So there's discussion on which ones can be actually done depending on the people who are there and who are willing to work on stuff. Then there is one, based on those discussions, then there are enhancements that are filed. They are called KEPs. They used to be called KEPs. Now they are called enhancements. The enhancement repository. There's typically a lot of discussion on the KEPs, and there'll be a debate over, okay, is this the right way to do this? Is there an alternate way to do this? What are the problems with upgrade, downgrade, things like that. So, and then things get split into like tasks, into issues and PRs, and people start filing stuff. And they form smaller teams. Like, for example, in storage, again, there's a group that's working on CSI migration, basically going from, right now, a lot of people don't use CSI, but then CSI is something that we would like to push people towards. So how do we migrate existing volumes from in-tree providers to CSI providers? So there's a really small team. There's like 4 or 5 people. So there are groups like that working on stuff. So you just have to find the right group to fit in. SIG cluster lifecycle is very open and very friendly as well. SIG storage again does a good job in managing, how to allocate the work and how to get things done. But essentially, when you hear somebody in a call saying, "Okay, I need help with this," then you raise your hand and you say, "Okay, I don't know much, but I can help. I'll read up. Will you be able to help me?" So raise your hand, and that usually works.
Yes, and some of our SIGs do ask if there's new contributors on the line as well. So that's an ample opportunity for you to introduce yourselves. If you're a SIG chair that doesn't do that, that's listening, you should. All right, Gus, go back to the remote team thing, because I think that's so critical with Kubernetes in general, because a lot of our team is distributed, a lot in the United States, but of course globally as well, with you being one of them. What are some of the other tips besides watching SIG meetings, videos, and things that help you stay connected and stay productive that you can recommend to other people?
I'm not distributed. You're distributed. I'm all in one place.
True.
Yeah. So I don't know. With any organization, communication is the biggest cost, right? So the limit to scalability is how well you can communicate. So Kubernetes does very well with Slack. Slack's a big part of communication, and that works quite well around all time zones and things. Also, Kubernetes uses a lot of Zoom meetings like this one, and that doesn't work so well. They're videoed, which is good. You can catch up, but it becomes a one-way communication at that point. You can't contribute back to the SIG during the discussion, but you can watch it afterwards. So it's kind of a halfway solution. And necessary. I don't have any better alternative for that.
What about putting your agenda items on and having someone else talk for you?
Yeah, that's possible. And I've done that a few times. I've had other people present projects that I've worked on. That you need to trust the other person a lot, or at least you need to know that they know about the project, know the point you're trying to raise, because they're going to need to field questions about it. So that requires a sort of second person on your project or whatever to be that. That works. Particularly the demo style, that works well. Like I said, I had some people demo some of my projects at SIGAPps. SIGAPps has a regular kind of demo slot. And that worked fairly well because it was less about discussion and more about just presenting the thing. That worked okay. If it's occasional meetings, if there's one, like if there's something I'm particularly involved in or particularly have opinions about that I want to contribute to the discussion, then I'll make the effort. I'll just get up early that morning and attend the meeting. But that's not something I can do regularly. And so that works. It's okay. Usually, also just you want to restrict communication. The way to get efficient communication is to not try to communicate in the first place. So compartmentalizing the work. So for me, I wouldn't try to work very closely with someone in Eastern Europe because it would just be 12 hours off and it would be terrible. Whereas I can work fairly well with someone from Western US or certainly anyone in Asia time zone works very well for me. So try to, if you're going to work closely with someone in the same time zone makes a big difference. Or try to pick tasks that are sort of self-contained that you don't need to interact heavily with someone over. For Kubernetes, that's fine. Like it's free software. This is normal free software stuff. People take a change, they work on it at home, and they upload a patch. And there's fairly slow communication around that patch, and that's normal and fine. The KEP process, the enhancement proposals, they're more of a discussion, but they're also not. You need to prepare a document ahead of time, and then there's sort of rounds of people put comments on it, then you respond to them. So it works quite well remotely. You've just got, the conversation takes 24 hours to put a bunch of comments up there and then respond to the comments. And that's okay. They don't need to be fast conversations, those ones. So that works quite well. So all in all, it works fine. I would just... it's not a corporate environment. I'm not standing at a whiteboard talking about something. That's just not the way we work as a community. And because of that, it works quite well distributed and remote. It is worthwhile trying to, if you can afford it or get your employer to pay for it, it is definitely worthwhile attending a KubeCon or two, meeting people face-to-face, making friends, building relationships. That really, really helps when it then comes time to asking questions or even getting reviews done. It's not that there's favoritism, but just being able to put a face behind the name always helps make the communication go better. Yeah.
Those are great, Gus. Thank you. Dims, what about you? You work from home.
Yeah, I work from home, and there's nobody I work with on a daily basis because I like Gus. I work on bits and pieces as well. And I kind of like divide up the day. Like morning, I work with the people in Europe, and then East Coast, since I'm on the East Coast, and then the West Coast people wake up, and then I have some teams that are Huawei teams that are working in China, so I talk to them as well. So I divide the days into chunks and take breaks. Otherwise, the work never ends because there's always somebody working around the globe, and there is always something to do or somebody to respond to. So I wanted to pick on something Gus said, which was when you come to KubeCon, make sure that you attend the contributor summit that happens the day before the KubeCon, because that is where you'll be able to meet everybody who's working on the development side. Because once KubeCon starts, you won't be able to find anyone unless you make an effort to go to their talks that they are giving, and that they're going to be there. Otherwise, you can't find people. It's going to be very difficult. So make sure that when the when we put out the announcement for the Contributor Summit, make sure that you are enrolled in that, and that way you you can be part of the community.
Are super helpful. SIG intros, if you want a high-level overview of everything that goes on with that special interest group. They even go into how they need new contributors in certain areas. I mean, that's where you can literally grab work for sure, 100%.
Right.
Thank you for that.
I mean, just this morning we had a call in Kate's Infra, which is the Kubernetes. So basically what's happening is there's a lot of infrastructure that's currently owned by Google that we are trying to move to the CNCF owned, whether it is repositories or GKE clusters or whatnot. So there is a lot of work, and we were wondering where everybody is. And so, we need help, and we would like help in almost everything that we do. So if you show up, I'm sure we'll find things for you to do.
That is correct. We are getting a lot of questions from current contributors, so this is a good one. This current contributor says that they see a ton of issues that have zillions of comments, quote zillions. They want to know your tips for coming up with consensus in those situations of people going back and forth and not necessarily coming up with either next steps or the PR at hand or the issue at hand.
Okay, I can give you an example, right? So we have this library called glog, and the glog repository was not accepting any pull requests from anybody, because it was just code that was exposed, and we started using it in Kubernetes, and there were issues. So we were patching on top of that code for literally 2-3 years, and we had like 5 to 10 issues and at least 20 email threads talking about this problem, right? But then the issue was that somebody had to put the effort in and say, okay, propose a specific way to do this. And what the proposal that I ended up doing was, let's fork glog, change it to klog, and we will maintain the interface as is for now. And then we will try to add other things like structured logging and things like that over a period of time. So you got to come up with some creative ideas, and you got to propose that, and you got to understand the underlying issues, because it was not easy to do this, because there are several libraries that still use glog, and we have to figure out a way to how to coexist with those libraries, for example. And how do you make sure that there's only one set of log files and not 2 sets of log files? The other problem is how do you deal with the command line parameters and things like that. So you got to think through all kinds of stuff, but the main thing that I had to do was research into the email threads and read up on the issues and try some experiments out, and then you come up with a solution. So it takes some persistence, and once people know that you are trying to do this and you're trying to pay down technical debt, they'll be very interested in trying to move whatever you're trying to do along. So that was one of my experiences.
Awesome. All right. And you mentioned earlier that the working group for Kubernetes infrastructure is looking for folks. Anybody else want to do any quick plugs? Because we did get a couple of questions from people that said, off the top of your head, what are SIGs that you know that are directly looking for help? Gus, you just went off mute. That means you might know one.
Networking, certainly.
Yes.
Despite how important it is, it's actually quite a small number of contributors.
Talk about some of the stuff that they work on. Like what's some of like the highest priority things for them right now?
On the spot, I don't know. IPv6 is one of my personal things I'd like to see happen there. It's already partly done, but there's still quite a few big chunks of work left to do there.
What about some other SIGs?
Yeah. All of them. I don't know of anyone that says, no, we've got enough people, please stop contributing. That's not a thing that happens.
Just to tack onto the networking one, if anybody listening does like networking, we are actually going to SIG Networking's meeting tomorrow to talk about how they can get new contributors and the process for getting them new contributors and expanding their current contributor pool. So if this does sound interesting to you, their meeting, I think, is tomorrow at most likely 2 p.m. Yes.
Right. And it doesn't have to be new feature all the time either.
No.
There is always need for updating to newer libraries. There is always need for going from, say, this morning I was talking to Derek from Signode, and he was saying that, we should try to go from C groups V1 to C groups V2, right? So there is always things that we need to catch up on and update the existing code, add test cases, add unit tests, add functional tests, and things like that. So there is, it doesn't end.
Your CSI example earlier is a good one. There's a lot of change happening in Kubernetes because it's very fast, because it's now a reasonably old project. There's a number of transitions from something older to something newer going on. A lot of them have started, and the new framework's there and has been exercised, but someone still needs to go along and migrate the old parts and finish up kind of the tail of that migration. So CSI, the storage plugins, a bunch of things are on the storage plugins, but a bunch of things are still on the old kind of way we used to do storage volumes. And that's a fairly typical thing. So there's a lot of places where you can just jump in and someone's already done the kind of the design work. They've already got approval for that. It's already started, but they just need help at that point then to just continue the migration and carry out the sort of the grunt work of the migration. And there's a lot of opportunity there for contributing code, and it's all very valuable, and it's very, very appreciated.
Yeah, and sometimes just removing things that were deprecated and that has passed the deprecation period is a big help to existing contributors, because you're taking care of something that otherwise they would have to do. So and all it means is dependency. And all it means is like you go delete code and make sure that you don't make any tests. So how hard it could be.
All right, and now we have it looks like a triple parter from a current contributor. Hold on one second, let me get to that. I think the first part was when do you contribute? Meaning, does work say that it's cool for you to contribute during the day? Do they say that you can contribute on a Friday? Do you contribute on your own hours? Is it like a mix of everything? Like, are you an adult that can do whatever you want? Like, tell me what is up with you and your kind of contributing day to day here?
I heard a really great conference talk by, I think it was Karen Sandler, who made the point that we all need to eat. Somehow we need to turn our cleverness and our awareness of technology, we have to turn it into food somehow. The usual way to do that is through companies, and companies lock up a little bit of intellectual property. They do things internally, secretly, in order to sell it. That's how you get a little bit of kind of money from this. So we need that because we need to eat. But at the same time, we need, for the long-term health of our industry, we need free software, we need community, we need like contributions to these sort of shared commons projects. And it was the first time I'd really heard that kind of short-term versus long-term trade-off kind of explained so well. So I think of it that way. I think of, I need to contribute to work because work pay me and I need to eat. But at the same time, I need to contribute to these big, interesting free software projects for my growth, for long term, for my growth, for my career growth, for not this job maybe, but the next job definitely. And so I've always stolen a little bit of time to work on these projects. Even within my employer, I've got a project I need to work on in the next 2 weeks, but then me being aware of whatever that Kubernetes thing is, that will help my employer in the next 6 months. So I need to kind of balance that short-term, long-term trade-off. And I find, and I've done this too, when I'm a manager, it's very easy to take a short-sighted view because you're looking down, you're looking just at your project, and you forget that there's going to be a next project. So as an employee looking up, I kind of have to sometimes ignore my manager and say, hey, I know that's what you want me to do, and I'm working on that. That's cool. I've got that. But at the same time, I'm also taking the longer term view and looking at the next project and making sure that we're in the right place for the right, skills and involved in the right teams for where that's going to need to be. So my advice, slightly ignore what your manager says, steal some time to work on Kubernetes, because the long-term benefits both you individually and them as an employer. And your manager won't necessarily have that long-term view at the top of their priorities. So for me, that means I do most of my work during work time for my employer on the projects I'm meant to do. And for me, that's projects around the periphery of Kubernetes. I work on a Kubernetes team, so I'm doing kubectl, sealed secrets, BKPR, a bunch of these projects that are in Kubernetes, but they're not in the Kubernetes project. They're kind of products and third-party projects around the outside. So then my Kubernetes work tends to be in my own time or something that falls out of some of that naturally if I have to fix a bug that I've encountered at work. And for me, I run a cluster. You can't really see it's just off camera, but I've got a stack of laptops that are Kubernetes. They're old laptops that my kids have dropped and smashed the screens on. And so I use them as Kubernetes nodes. And then I've got a Raspberry Pi cluster as my control nodes. And just running that allows me to learn an awful lot about Kubernetes. I know an awful lot about it just because I've had to put it back together when it's broken. And I've had to nurse it through upgrades, and I've had to do all these things, which if I only ran the unit tests, I wouldn't know that firsthand as to how Kubernetes actually works in practice. So that's given me a lot of knowledge and opportunity for working on fixes and things in my personal time.
Someone actually pinged in the middle of that and said, how do we get more companies to contribute? I mean, I think there's 500 plus that contribute now based off of the stats. I'm assuming, I'm typing to them right now. I'm assuming that they need larger contributions, or maybe they don't wait for the ping. But what's some advice that you have for just day-to-day engineers on how to convince their employer that they should consider upstreaming some of their work?
Right. So one thing that I've told people is like, look, you might be picking off of say 111 or 112, and you're building your product and you're trying something out and you're shipping it to your customer or building a cluster for them or whatever, right? But then unless you are involved in the projects, you don't know what is coming up next. And we put out like releases every 3 months, and it's so hard to keep track of everything that you do. And if you don't keep track of things, then you're going to lose the context. You will not be able to catch up quite easily, and you will hit bumps when you try to upgrade your existing environments or try to run the same software in the newer clusters because you forgot some, or you don't know, you're not aware of some of the things that have landed. For example, people had trouble when we turned on RBAC, right? So there were things that were not defaults turn into defaults, and then if you don't track that, and if you don't look at the change logs, and if you don't read up on them, and you don't look at the keps when they're filed, then you're basically you're not in touch with the pulse of the project. And if you're not in touch with the pulse of the project, then it's going to be harder for you to catch up later. And it's easier to give your employees some time to be able to do that work on a regular basis than to schedule some time to catch up every few quarters.
DIMS for manager. All right. And then so the individual that had asked about your work hours, and particularly how you're building an upstream with that. It sounds like they're a current approver and they're having some issues balancing their time. And it says that they do most things on their personal time, because they feel like management is starting to think that Kubernetes is getting boring, and that things are starting, like what you're saying, starting to spread out, and maybe they should start to, I guess, focus more on their day-to-day position. So they're trying to have a tough time balancing between those two things. So they're curious just to see what your advice would be if you were in this situation, like they are.
Yeah, that's tough. When you work at how to balance your time and work life and things, let me know, because that'd be good. Yeah,
I can
always a struggle.
Yeah, I can tell you what happened with me. So one of my managers ended up looking at some of the work I was doing and said, "James, why are you doing this? We don't do this today, and we don't really care about it right now." But then 3 months later, he comes back and say, "Oh, I'm glad you did the work that you were doing at that time, because we are going to use it in our cloud product." It's like they don't know that, and we are ahead of them. So there is always a teaching component involved, where you have to be able to sell your work to your employer. Only then will they know. If they don't know, they're going to assume that you're not fully utilizing your time, right? So you have to educate up your chain, and that's anyway useful for your career as well, right? So put together a small demo, try to involve your colleagues, and if you have a brown bag every 2 weeks, where you are sharing something. It might be just a 10-minute thing, and you're sharing with your colleagues. Or if you see a good video, like there were nice videos from FOSDEM, where people were talking about how to run Kubernetes in a rootless environment or something like that. Send those kinds of things around. Show people that your involvement in the community is turning into things that is of value to the company that you are in. So you got to do those kinds of stuff to be able to let them give you time to work on the stuff that you want to do.
Awesome. While you were all working on another question, I gave them my feedback in the DM, and then I said, of course, I will ask you all, but I have a feeling they're going to say, like, TLDR, when you figure it out, let us know. So I think I called that one on Gus's side. Yeah, and I think my TLDR was exactly, there is no answer. Do what you can do. Don't burn yourself out. When you figure it out, let us know. PR is accepted.
Yeah. Yeah, I gave a talk about this years ago, that about how technology goes, from crazy to interesting to boring, and becomes commodity. And so, the old things we used to talk about 20 years ago was, no one made money selling Linux, but they made money using Linux. Used to be the phrase that we threw around a long time ago. People were trying to work out, how do we make money out of Linux? I feel like Kubernetes is doing a lot of the same things, because it's kind of sprung with quite a mature vision right from the beginning, and it went straight into sort of a community project with a free license. There is no Kubernetes Inc. There's no company that kind of is centrally driving it and trying to turn it into a profit thing, and this is good. So Kubernetes has jumped kind of straight from crazy into boring. It's now commodity. It's now infrastructure. It's now just part of what we can all build on. What that means is it's actually really hard, I think, for companies to make money from Kubernetes. They instead make money using Kubernetes. But what that means is it's hard to get contributors on the core, I think, whereas everyone wants to use it to run their application stack, of course. And that's, I think, a success problem. I think that's the way it's meant to be. Yeah.
And then one last question, and we are done for February. The last question is a positive one. If there was one thing in Kubernetes that you wish you had the time to work on, meaning, you're full time on this one project, what would it be and why?
Okay.
My personal wish list is swap. I think we need to put swap back on. I'm annoyed that we don't have swap on our clusters, and my RAM constrained laptops are really struggling because they don't have swap. And I think it's actually a fairly easy problem to solve. And I think it's been swept under the rug
Yeah.
somewhat because of the Google history. Google doesn't run swap on their machines, and people assume like that's the way it's meant to be without actually questioning whether that's the way it should be. That's my personal thing.
That's funny because I got so much flack for that PR, two-line PR that disabled swap. So yeah.
What about you, Dibs?
So the things I wish I could somehow get a few people like Brian Grant and Tim Hawkin into a room and get them to write down all the stuff in their head. That is what I would want to do.
Well, I mean, we could do that at the next contributor summit. So if Tim and Brian are listening, we would like to have a session.
Yeah, it's half the time is like Brian will rattle out like 12 things and like, Brian, let me write it down or something because otherwise I have to go back and listen to the video again. And it's hard to keep up with them. And that's one thing that I love about this community is, there are so many people who are so good at the things that they do, including you guys. And I get an opportunity to learn from them. So that's what I like here.
And do either of you have questions for each other? Now's your time. Anything you've ever wanted to know about DIMS, guys?
I'm still amazed at the amount of stuff. I've said this to DIMS before, like the amount of stuff he does, the amount of pull requests he turns up on, the amount of reviews he does. Like I don't know how, like I'm honestly interested in knowing how you manage your day to get through that many things. Like I'll spend half a day reading email and catching up on the previous day's conversation. And then like I only get like 3 hours or so of actual work done each day. And the rest is just spent catching up on the previous day. And yet somehow I see people like DIMS and a bunch of other people just churning out stuff. And I'm like, how? What's the magic silver bullet that lets me do that?
There's nothing, Gus. Nothing like that. I don't think so. I mean, anyway.
Well,
no.
You do the filters. You do some basic tech, right, like automation, self-care. Like
yeah, I mean, make sure you have a good set of Gmail filters. That's what I use. So you can divide up the stuff into things that people are pinging you on. I mean, this, Gus, but I'm just saying it for the others. So, prioritize like the Slack messages first, and then you have Gmail where people are actually pinging you coming from the pull requests and issues. So things like that. Just organize your work a little and break up your days into chunks where you're working on different things, because you're never working on one thing in Kubernetes. There is always for me, for example, I look at jobs that are broken. I go look at old issues. I look at incoming PRs. I look at what got merged, last night, or which has a potential to break the CI changes. So I break my day into different chunks and I do different things. And just because of that, it feels like I'm in many places, but I'm not. So that's one way I cope with the fire hose from Kubernetes.
the fire hose that is Kubernetes. And that ends our February edition of Meet Our Contributors. Thank you both so much for joining. Gus, awesome to have you from, it feels like another planet. I've never been to Sydney. You'll have to welcome me.
Here in the summer hemisphere, yeah.
Yes.
Sydney is awesome. I loved it.
Yeah, you've been?
Yeah.
All right. DIMS, thank you very much. Awesome. Bring so much value all the time. Thank you very much. George, thanks for streaming. And that ends for us today. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.